Hi Sarah, hi Dawn. Do let me know when you can see me and hear me. I can see Leslie's here, and Carolyn, Michelle, hi Michelle, and Bridget as well. So hopefully I'll be coming through. John Ford's here as well. So, and Tish. So let's hope I can join this little party very shortly. So we hope so, otherwise... Ha! Fantastic, you can see me. Hi everybody, just let me know if you can hear me okay as well. Just give me a thumbs up or some such indicator that I'm coming through kind of loud and clear. From a rather chilly Knaresborough. A nighttime walk, absolutely KCM, yeah, it's coming down here, so hopefully the lights will be lighting up before we know it. Fantastic, thank you Sarah for letting me know. And Linda B's here as well, fantastic. So we are all set, I believe, for an evening perambulator. A little pre-dinner stroll, working with appetite perhaps. It's coming up to 5 o'clock here in the UK. Appreciate it's not probably lunchtime or even earlier where you are, but you're joining me here at about 5 o'clock, 3 minutes to 5 o'clock. So hello Carla, lovely to have you with us, and Michelle Gillis as well. So welcome one and all to Knaresborough. And I thought an evening stroll, bit different, not been over here for a while. I think it's probably about 7 or 8 months since I was last in Knaresborough on a tour, so I thought it was high time to reacquaint you, and a bit of sundown with the lights hopefully coming up in time. I think is just what we need. And of course it's not Christmas anymore either, and that was why I was kind of reluctant to do many evening tours until after Christmas, because it's just becomes a Christmas de facto tour, doesn't it? Whether you intend it to be or not. So I'm hoping that by and large most of the trappings are of Christmas have passed us by. So yes, absolutely, Prism live. Quite a number of us now have moved across to Prism, and we're finding it thus far very good. I'm not really putting it through its paces tonight. I haven't got any photos for you. It's just stories of me, I'm afraid, and of course the beautiful town of Knaresborough. So hopefully that'll be enough. But Prism, yeah, it's fantastic for integrating images, video, and a whole bunch of things. So we'll be putting that through its paces over the next few weeks. But it's lovely to be out and about again. I've hardly been touring. Really busy Christmas. Then I was ill. The website's taken up an awful lot of kind of time. So still Christmas in Georgia with Anna. Okay. Well, you know, of course they used to go up, didn't they, to February in Christmas tide, beginning of February, in the kind of the very old, early kind of church version of Christmas. So I suppose that's appropriate. Haven't done many tours of our holidays. Glad to be back and see you all in beautiful Yorkshire. Fantastic, Michelle. Well, welcome to you as well. We're another minute or so until 5 o'clock. Stories of you, stories of you. Not sure they'll be of me, by me, perhaps, or recounted by me. That's perhaps the way to put it, isn't it? But anyway, whatever it is, we will try and thank you, Bridget. We'll try and keep ourselves warm and cosy on this rather chill evening here in North Yorkshire, and we'll go and see. I don't know what I'm going to see. I haven't been down on an evening for a good year or so, so we'll see what we'll see. But we'll see it together, and I think that's the main thing, isn't it? So if nothing else, we should get some lovely shots down by the river. Hopefully the bridge will be lit up by the time we get down there. And George's Orthodox Christian, so a different calendar. Thank you, Leslie, for adding that in. So let me just take a sip of water, and then I think we're there or thereabouts. That way on 5 o'clock, and we can look to kick off our little soiree here in Knaresborough. So there we go, 5 o'clock. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, welcome wherever you are. You're joining me here today in the North Yorkshire market town of Knaresborough. And over the years, many people have come to claim that Knaresborough is amongst the prettiest, if not the prettiest, of towns of Yorkshire, of which the competition is pretty high, has to be said. And I tend to agree with them. It is a place of unique charm. It has got all its own kind of thing going on. We've been here a number of times before on these tours, but I think mostly during the daytime. So I thought it would be quite nice to take a stroll. Evening strolls, the lights are going down, so you can see there's very little light left in the kind of sky, but the shop windows are really kind of illuminating now our kind of passage. So to see what evening in Knaresborough can bring us. And of course, because it's dark, we may reflect here and there on some of the darker parts of the history, culture, fables and legends of this very town. So let me take my glove off, let me spin round the camera, and into it my hands are freezing. But hopefully you can now see. So we're starting here in kind of Silver Street, and Knaresborough is a kind of delightful, if those who haven't been on a tour or not been in person, it's a delightful kind of rabbit warren of kind of medieval streets and stone staircases that weave their way up and down the kind of hillside, because the town centre is perched on the cliffs above the river Nidd. An imposing railway viaduct kind of cuts across the gorge, offering amazing views to visitors as they arrive by train. And hopefully we'll be taking part in that fantastic vista in just a few minutes' time. So Knaresborough first appears in the Domesday Book known as Knaresborough, an Anglo-Saxon place, meaning it was the castle on the rock, the fortress on the rock. And boy, did they pick a good location to build a fortress here. But let's start in the marketplace. The centre of the marketplace is the Market Cross. Actually, the cross that we see today is a replacement. It's 20th century, early 20th century, but it replaces a kind of medieval cross, which was there to signify the right to hold markets. And the first record we have historically of the market here is in 1206. But actually its royal charter was granted a little later in 1310 by King Edward II. More of him later on. And a market is still held here every Wednesday in the square. They toll a bell the evening before to remind folk of the market. Isn't that lovely in this light? Just sort of at the end of a blue hour, but the light's gloriously illuminating, hopefully giving you a kind of real feel of the end of business feel here in this kind of North Yorkshire market town, as folk are now either heading home, heading out for their evening of entertainment. So as I say, I thought we might just dwell here and there on the history of this ancient town, in particular thinking about its kind of darker side. A kind of town this old, of course, has got stories of murders, bloody battles, witches and ghosts. And we don't need to go far to find them, because the first story I want to tell you is about this pub right in front of us here. It is the Royal Oak. It was the pub where Blind Jack, whose statue just behind me, was famously the fiddler. But we're coming right up to date, because one of the things that people often ask me when I talk about ghosts, often in York, is, well, you know, that's all well and good, but have anybody seen ghosts recently? Because they all seem so old, these stories. So this is actually a very, very recent story. And it's about the owners, Tony and Laurie Handley, and the fact that in taking over this pub, they believed quite passionately, quite fervently and logically, they were sharing their home with ghosts. So they had their suspicions before they purchased the business. This is obviously a public house and a hotel. But they waited until actually taking possession of the Royal Oak before asking the previous owners if they could tell them anything about the ghosts in the house. And on the very day they took possession, the sellers confirmed that the buyers were correct in their thinking. The Royal Oak had been on market for a long time before the new owners bought it. And there'd been many, many viewers, all of whom had been greeted by the smell of rotten fish in what was the main bedroom when the house was a pub. Now, despite redecoration, new carpets and steam cleaning, every time somebody was shown around, that room stank, until the day the new buyers came to view. So the buyers kind of take it on, knowing that the ghost didn't mind them being there. Indeed, they were certainly very active in the first few days and weeks after they moved in. Even from day one, when an unseen girl's voice called out, "Hello," and then someone locked Laurie out of the house. The previous owners had mentioned both these characters to them, and also mentioned a visitor who walked the landing and could be heard climbing the now long removed staircase into what had been the servants' quarters that was now effectively a roof void. Now it was the turn of the new owners. The someone had been most active in delighting by removing items and hiding them. From the outset, they both independently, both husband and wife, had called this presence Walter, and they blamed him for the day he bolted the front door on the inside after Laurie had popped out, and later for preventing them from hanging Christmas decorations around the very same doorway. No matter what they did to secure them, the chain of silver bells crashed to the floor. So Walter won that round. And the girl who called out hello, well, her name is Grace. So Grace is a maid who walked the corridor. There's also a red-nosed man who pressed his bloated face against the window by the back door, and a smart gentleman in a blue blazer that was seen in the utility room, quite possibly the same man seen by somebody else months later up on the landing. The group of 3 people seen peering in the back window of the main bar. Now, and Mary Balls, this is just 3 spirits that are present here. All were seen and heard within the first few weeks, not just by the new owners, but by their children, visiting friends, visiting relatives, and from both sides of their family. All unsuspecting, all confirming it was not just them. One of these visiting relatives was their 3-year-old niece, who used to disappear upstairs whenever she came round. And when she was asked, "Where have you been?" would answer, "Upstairs, playing with Grace." They heard about the landlord's granddaughter who died in the building on a visit. Some years later, guests sleeping in what was the bedroom that stank of fish awoke to see the door open and a white-robed man peering in. At first, they assumed it was the owner in a dressing gown, but it wasn't, and they think it could have possibly been the granddad checking on Grace. And so what about Walter? Well, one day their niece was walking, or rather hobbling, down the high street, armed with 2 French sticks, which she was using as walking sticks. When asked what it was she was doing, she replied she was walking like the man who lives in Auntie Laurie's house. You know, the one called Albert. So there you have it, possibly the same Albert who one day hurled a rather fine artist plate from a windowsill in their sitting room, within minutes of the landlady showing a visitor her father's Masonic badge. Now the owner now knows that the Masonic badge should have been returned to his lodge in Harrogate after the father's death. So is Albert a Mason. It's just another of the mysteries of historic Knaresborough. So I've not told that story before. I hope you enjoyed that one. Before we just move on, let us admire for a moment the quite fabulous statue of Ursula, Mother Shipton, who we're going to talk about a little bit later on the tour. And hopefully with this light you'll be able to see a little bit of the detail there. It is the famous statue of Mother Shipton here in Knaresborough, sometimes described as a witch, sometimes as a healer, definitely associated with folklore, involved in apparently in the origin of the Rollright stones in Oxfordshire. There are many, many stories about Ursula. She looks suitably creepy there, doesn't she? All lit up. And this fabulous statue, this fabulous art installation, really kind of captures the sheer strangeness of Ursula, known of course as the Yorkshire Witch. She was born in 1488 and became popularly known as Mother Shipton. So we'll talk about her a little bit later on, but that light looking good, isn't it? I'm enjoying that. One of my Christmas presents, a little tripod light to just bring a bit of atmosphere to these evening tours. So I think that's working rather well, don't you? And let's just change. We can make that slightly. There we go. So she's got wonderful little sort of beings and beasties around her, invoking the spirits and kind of controlling all manner of kind of devilment. So that's Ursula. So let's walk on. Let's go and have a look at the castle. I'll just switch that lamp off, and we will see. Hopefully, by now, some lights will come up. If not, we'll use the trusty light. But isn't Knaresborough looking lovely by the evening? Good effects, thank you very much. You wouldn't want to cross Mother Shipton, Susan. You're quite right. You'd regret it, and I think you regret it very, very quickly indeed. So we're going to have a walk down and have a look at the castle. And I'm hoping by the time we get there, it's going to be illuminated, because when that happens, it is fabulous. If not, I will use my torchlight and we'll talk a bit about the castle. So I mentioned that Knaresborough is a kind of fortress on the rock. And the castle sort of dates all the way back to the Norman conquest with the, hello Kathy, with the obviously conquest by William the Conqueror, leading the Normans. A kind of key factor in how they sort of planned not just simply to conquer this country, but rather to hold it, was with the building of castles. And castles was a kind of new thing. Nobody really kind of come across castles before William the Conqueror. Certainly not stone castles, which he built. So all across the north, which had been very, very difficult to kind of subdue. Obviously it's big, wild, open, bad weather and so forth. So it took William and the Normans quite some time to come to hold the north. So once they did, they planned to kind of make sure their holdings were all good by building castles. And so this is one of the Norman castles. It doesn't want to be lit up yet, so we may have to switch our torch back on and try and bring you as best we can. Otherwise it'll be a bit mysterious. Maybe we'll do what we can to put that right. So I think I'm going to put the light on, because it does light up in an evening, but perhaps not yet. Perhaps we've come a little bit early. But anyway, we'll do our best to show you what could be zoomed here. It's rather dark down here. It's to be hoped I don't tumble down to my death several hundred feet below. But we are coming into Knaresborough Castle, which, as I say, is rather less illuminated than perhaps I had anticipated. It is rather dark, but we'll go and see what we can see rather than worrying what we can't. But that light's working rather well. Oh, look, that's good, isn't it? So this is the gatehouse high running in, that we've kind of arrived at. And so we're kind of passing into the fabric of this fantastic castle. And it really is atmospheric, absolutely tish. Or just plain dark is another way of describing it. But let's go with atmospheric. I like that, atmospheric. So, and the good thing is as well is you can only see the bits of the castle that exist, because obviously an awful lot of it is missing. And yeah, I thought it was going to be illuminated by now, but that might be a little bit later on. So I can always come on another time and show the castle all kind of lit up. But the castle, so it first dates from the Norman times, sort of built to kind of hold and control the north of England. But it kind of first comes to national attention in 1170. And this is when the castle was under control of a guy called Hugh de Morville, who became notorious as one of the murderers. I did say, well, some dark stories of murder now. Became notorious one of the murderers of St. Thomas à Becket. So Henry II had been kind of close friends with Thomas Becket in the early years of his reign, making him Archbishop of Canterbury, no less. But then Becket began to kind of champion church privileges, and this brings him into conflict with the king. Henry II basically tried to claim supremacy over both the state and the church, and Thomas said, not so fast, Buster. Basically, you can't, right? You've got no authority over the church. That is our domain. So after this, many people believed, in effect, Thomas was guilty of treachery, and he fled into temporary exile. And then Henry, the king, had his son crowned, and he did it himself. And this was a kind of real affront to Thomas à Becket, because it was his job as Archbishop of Canterbury to do the kind of coronations. So this was a massive, intended kind of snub. And Thomas à Becket is alleged to have then had the king excommunicated. So in effect sent out to eternal damnation. And he's said to have exclaimed, the king, in response, who will rid me of this turbulent priest? Whereupon Hugh de Morville of Knaresborough, among others, travelled to Canterbury and murdered him. And after they committed this terrible crime, they fled north and barricaded themselves into Knaresborough Castle, where they lived for a year. And the reason for this, that Knaresborough was their kind of place of imprisonment, seemed to be the fact there was a strong anti-Becket feeling in the north. And it was the Archbishop of York, who was Becket's sworn enemy, that gave them protection. So their time and experiences there are woven into Knaresborough traditions. Legend has it that over the course of the year they were subject to overwhelming guilt and remorse, and also demonstrations of divine justice. It was told that animals shrank away from the knights, and dogs even refused the crumbs that fell from the table. So the castle sort of gone through various iterations. I'm trying to sort of find areas that can kind of illuminate for you. King John spent quite a lot of money on it. Edward I also. But it's under kind of Edward II that it kind of next comes to prominence. Edward II was famously a weak king. His father had been a warrior king, incredibly successful in his wartime exploits against the French, also very hostile towards the Welsh. But his son was kind of nothing like it. So his son had inherited the castle, and he continued to make the improvements here. But shortly after inheriting the throne, young Edward II granted this castle to his favourite, Piers Gaveston. So Edward II's English barons felt that Piers had an undue influence over Edward, and they forced the king to exile Piers in 1308. This exile, though, didn't last long, as Piers Gaveston returned in 1309. And his return proved hugely unpopular with the increasingly powerful barons, and eventually Piers Gaveston fled. He went to Scarborough Castle, where he was besieged and forced to surrender after a fortnight when the castle ran out of food. And although Piers Gaveston had been promised safe conduct, he was then beheaded by the Earl of Warwick in 1312. And during this time, Edward II was in Knaresborough Castle. He was here to be close to his favourite, powerless to save him, but felt compelled by the need to be near him. Knaresborough was also smashed into chaos by a disastrous defeat to the Scots at the Battle of Bannockburn. This led to great Scottish raids into England and rebellion, and in 1317 the castle here was seized by John Lilburne for Thomas Earl of Lancaster, and Knaresborough Castle was then besieged. And the castle's constable ended up spending £55 of his own money besieging his own castle and constructing siege engines. But Knaresborough Castle was finally recaptured for Edward III after 3 months, when they breached through the walls. In 1318, the Scots came and burnt much of Knaresborough to the ground, including the church and the priory. But by 1327, the barons, led by Edward II's wife, Queen Isabella, rebelled finally against Edward and captured him at Kenilworth. And he was briefly imprisoned at Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, where he was murdered on the 21st of September 1327. So the king most associated with this castle, one of the most notorious in English history. So I'll come back around this side. I do apologise, I thought it would be more illuminated, but hopefully you're getting something of the vibe of medieval castle. It came into the Duchy of Lancaster about 50 years later, and it still belongs. The castle, Knaresborough, the forest, is part of the Crown Estates. So this is a property of the Crown. It's leased to Knaresborough, but the castle is it's still a royal castle to this day. And the best kind of preserved bit of it is actually over here. Oh, there are some lights on over here. Oh, look over here. And this is what remains of the 14th and the 15th century from the castle. And these were used for a variety of purposes. Things like the administration, courtroom, So, obviously castles weren't simply about military fortifications. It was also about, the administration of rule, but also dispensing of justice and so forth. So prisons, courts, as well as kind of garrisons, administration, tax collecting, all these kind of elements, were part and parcel of the royal castle. So these buildings, if you like, that survive are part of that. We've got a prison cells and we've got a court within the envelope, of the castle as well. So the light is actually starting to get a little brighter. So hopefully, as we go a bit further on the tour, we'll catch some more light. But we're just going to stay here for a minute. So the castle also featured heavily in the English Civil War in the 17th century. And of course, it was that war that led to the downfall of not just this castle, but almost all the others around it in Yorkshire as well. Because York was the centre of the royalist effort in the north, and much of Yorkshire was sympathetic to the royalists. And as a result of this, as bit by bit the parliamentarian forces conquered the north, conquered Yorkshire, as a result of this, they were terribly keen to get rid of the castles to prevent any further kind of sieges. And so this is the interior there, the courthouse, dating from about 1600. That's in one of the buildings just in front of us. And you see again from the display there, the stocks, the instrument of punishment for holding felons either before trial or as part of their punishment. So this had been a kind of royalist stronghold, but it's taken by parliamentary forces in 1644, just after the fall of the siege of York. I am stalking the building. It's like you try and get it again. It's like a Nosferatu coming down the stairs, if you're familiar with that scene. That's great, actually. I like that. Do that again. I am coming to get you. So once the parliamentarian force has taken it, the castle is then taken down. And of course, the stone is used elsewhere, like so often. This stone is kind of repurposed and kind of used to build elsewhere. But much of the fabric of the castle was taken down after 1644. It's believed that this law hereabouts is also haunted. They've been variously described as two men, as wraiths, as in wraiths in the kind of Lord of the Rings, W-R-I, ever how you spell that, wraiths. But they appear to be locked in mortal combat, one standing over the other, about to kind of penetrate with a sword or an axe or some kind of stabbing kind of implement. And it appears they're kind of locked in this eternal combat. And I frequently witnessed around these gardens on a night. So there's lots and lots of little kind of ghost stories associated. It's often the same, with these very old places. There's been time for the legends and the stories, of course, to accumulate through the ages. I thought it would be good to share the Royal Oak one because it's very recent in the last few years. But of course, many or most of these stories date from kind of far earlier sort of periods, which is perhaps not surprising given that we're looking at the ruins of the buildings from the medieval period. A wraith, that's right. Thank you, Dawn, but it looks rather atmospheric, doesn't it? In silhouette light up. So it would seem that those two guys are a parliamentarian and a royalist, perhaps, fighting the eternal tussle for the eventual control, what they hope will be the control of Knaresborough Castle. So, obviously the main reason we come down here is to give you the spectacular view across the ravine. I'm not sure entirely as yet what, if anything, we want to see. So it may be that we have a rather different Knaresborough vibe this evening, and we will see in just 1 minute what we've hopefully come to see. But either which way will certainly give you an experience of Knaresborough. Picture with the glowing eyes on the wall. Oh, no, I don't think I did. But I'll try one more time just to see if we can see what Linda was experiencing there. So now it would appear that the lights have yet to come on in the ravine, but hopefully by the time we kind of walk down to the bottom, they will be lit up. Because right now, I was rather anticipating we'd have more lights than this to obviously talk about Knaresborough and the ravine and the bridge, but we can't actually see it, which is a bit of a drawback. But there we go. We will go down anyway to the bottom and we'll have a look. So rather than me pausing on the way down, I'm just going to kind of head straight down because I don't know actually how much you're going to see. I've got my lamp lit, so hopefully we will have something of a visual to share. But for those kind of not familiar, we're about to kind of walk down the hillside. So as I mentioned earlier, right from the earliest time, you had a castle that was built up on the right at the top of the hill, but then it kind of plunges down into a gorge that is right in front of us now, but you can see precious little of it, I recognise, because they haven't lit the lights yet. So there's either some kind of economy drive, or somebody didn't put the coins in the meter, or there's some kind of light failure, because normally by now this is all kind of lit up. But nonetheless, it gives us a new and interesting way to see Knaresborough like you've not seen before. So apologies, there's not a right lot appearing on your screen right now. It's rather dark, and I'm kind of working my way down the ravine. So we're going to see the river Nidd, and the Nidd, we believe, is derives from an Anglo-Saxon term, which means kind of hidden river, because for about 4 miles it disappears under the ground. But what we can sort of see down here is a sort of a spectacular formation where glacial activity and millions of years of kind of development have basically created a V-shaped wedge where the soft, the porous, easily eroded rock has given way to create a ravine, and then either side of it is kind of carboniferous rocks that form what they now call crags. And the crags are sort of incredibly sort of dramatic rock faces that create the sort of steep sides. So anybody who's been to Knaresborough, who's sort of familiar with the town, will kind of know it's kind of characterised by the fact it appears to sit right at the bottom of a valley. And the river flows through you maybe just start to hear the sounds of the kind of river. It's just weird just down here. It's like audio description for the visually impaired, isn't it? You can't see anything, I have to describe it all. So you not just hear the sound of the weir down here. So right at the kind of bottom of the gorge we're kind of heading right now, obviously the river Nidd sort of flows through that and dominates the sort of topography of the town. The way we experience it is very much where we are in relation to the river and the castle at the top. So it creates a very, very pleasing sort of flooded valley effect. Really sort of beautiful. And for many, many centuries, it's been treated as just a beautiful kind of leisure destination. But its history was in textiles and dyeing. The very plentiful supply of clean water was incredibly useful when in the textile industry, in linens and dyeing and so forth. You need enormous amounts of clean water. If you've got mucky water on, you've then got to wash your finished garments more times. It also, because the water moved quickly, you had time for sanitation. What that meant was that you had a better chance of surviving the nasties, because the water was moving more quickly. You didn't have sort of stagnant water collecting, kind of contaminated water. So for those kind of two reasons, it seems that a community's kind of flourished here for, kind of probably several thousand years, going back to the sort of the Ice Age and so forth, the Iron Age communities rather. But that certainly by the 17th, the 18th centuries, this was a very, very successful destination in textile production. As they taking advantage of all this kind of clean, fast-flowing water. And we're just say at the bottom now. So you've seen how I've been talking here, probably a good sort of 5 minutes, walking down to the bottom. So, it really is quite a climb from the kind of top to the bottom. But what it does is it just creates this sort of dynamic of the slopes, the hillsides, and how kind of individual and sort of delightful higgledy-piggledy that kind of setup is. Oh, a lovely shot that is. You're either at the top of Knaresborough or the bottom, or you're on your way to the top or the bottom, if that kind of makes sense. You know, all kind of paths lead to the top or to the bottom. And hopefully we're just starting to get a bit of illumination now. We're about to see at least kind of one or two of these. Need danger. Honestly, I was perfectly safe there. It was more, I was taking it slowly because I was being, I wanted to tread carefully, as you might say. So I was kind of conscious. It was actually rather boring to watch. So if you could put up with the boring, I can put up with the small measure of risk. So in the daytime, of course, this is somewhere you could go and hire a boat. It's a very popular kind of destination still to this day for kind of day trippers, a lot of time, holiday makers, come and have an ice cream, take a boat on the river for the afternoon, just a kind of lazy time. Obviously a bit cold right now, so you might not want to do that in January, I guess. But nonetheless, you probably have a lot of the river to yourself. So, you know, kind of swings and roundabouts, right? That's how I look at it anyway. You know, but we're from Yorkshire, so we tend to be very sort of phlegmatic about it being cold because it's cold a lot of the year. In fact, waiting for it to be warm, you wouldn't get much done each year. But anyway, put that to one side. So yeah, Marigold, if you want to come and get yourself a boat, and Americans function in much more light than you Brits. Yeah, I don't know, the light situation, it's kind of, there's two things, isn't there, at play here. One is all the public money, public purse is very, very scraped thin, you know, not much money to spend. The second, of course, is that by spending less on electricity, you're also doing better by the environment, aren't you? So you're sort of in a double vice grip now that you know, the public authorities can kind of justify things being dark because it's better for the environment. So it's hard to see that things are going to change kind of anytime soon. But hey ho, there we go. Well, at least we've got some light down here. So hopefully this will bring you to be able to start having your first appreciation of the viaduct. So the viaduct spans the valley. It goes right the way across the Nidd Gorge. So this is a kind of railway viaduct. It was built to transport kind of railway lines going across. And of course the railways created the great sort of connection between kind of towns and cities and locations. Up until that point, the connectivity would have been much more kind of limited, but the railways bring is a fast way of getting people, goods, capital to and from market. So they're solar light motion sensors. No, I don't think the council's paid the bill either. I think they've turned the electric off. And it's still looking very modest. So this is kind of one of those famous views in Yorkshire, except you can't view it really. So let's take you to what you kind of can view, and then I'll hopefully make up perhaps for what we're kind of missing out on. So let's see, can we get any light? So again, we're walking down by, still in Yorkshire, I know you get 10 minutes a day. Again, you can't see, unfortunately, into the gloom, but we are now just by the water side. So that's a rather nice shot, isn't it? And so what the viaduct does is it brings fantastic views when you're coming in by train. Again, there's just not enough light for me to kind of show you, but the light's sort of right in the middle of your picture there now, up at the kind of castle side. You get those fabulous view when you're coming in by train. So it really is a kind of sense of arrival coming into Knaresborough. And in 1851, when they come, they also bring more visitors. So up until that point, the wealth of Knaresborough has largely been focused on the kind of textile industry, which have made a lot of money for a lot of people. But now, being so close to Harrogate, this train line, what it does is it brings them the opportunity to start to cater for the medical tourists of Harrogate, those coming for kind of health cures, tonics, rest and recuperation, those kind of post-operative and so forth. So Knaresborough kind of gets in on the act there and gets into the luxury. Blind Jack, absolutely. Should have got Blind Jack to do it. He'd have seen more. The kind of luxury end of the market. So Knaresborough gets a real kind of bite of that Harrogate cherry as well, because obviously it's a less than 10-minute train ride from here into the centre of kind of Harrogate. So it's only kind of 4 miles away. So there's that kind of benefit as well. That obviously kind of drives things along. What's kind of interesting about this viaduct is it is the second one on this kind of location. The first one was built a couple of years earlier, and was built apparently to the specifications that were required in the day. But come the opening day, the very day it was due to open, when the train was just about to kind of set off across the four spans of the bridge, to kind of carry the mayor and the local dignitaries, a crack suddenly appeared in the structure. And it said within 2 minutes, the whole thing collapsed into the River Nidd. It actually caused a kind of tidal wave, believe it or not, in the river. This tumbling, cascading masonry. And it said that built of limestone, it killed all the marine life, firstly from shock, but secondly from lime poisoning over the years. So consequently, it made this to be a very, very unhealthy place for marine life, and it took a kind of generation to recover from that. But nonetheless, they decided to kind of rebuild it. There were all sorts of accusations and counter-accusations, but who was to blame? It was felt the engineers hadn't been sufficiently kind of close to the work to ensure it had been built to the spec. But of course there were others that believed that this was always going to happen. Not only was it predictable, it had been predicted, it had been prophesied by none other, of course, than Mother Shipton. So Mother Shipton, Ursula Southall, has become sort of synonymous with Knaresborough. So let's talk a bit about her story, because it's a very interesting one. It's very memorable, and like so much, over time, it's probably been twisted and distorted, but it's hard not to believe there must have been enough for people to believe this at the time. So she was born as plain old Ursula Southall in 1488 in a cave on the other side of the river to where we are now. So pretty humble beginnings. Her mother, Agatha, was hauled in front of the magistrates and interrogated, made to declare the name of the child's father. But she refused to do so. And she paid a hefty price. She must have had her reasons. Some, of course, believe Congress with the devil was what brought about Ursula's entrance to this world. But whatever it was, Agatha wasn't saying. And so as a result, the mother and daughter were effectively banished from the town, sent beyond to live in a cave with a magic well they had for drinking water. Ursula was given up then for adoption by a biological mother at the age of 2, and from a very young age she began to manifest the psychic gifts of divination and prophecy. She moved into a house with a new family, but strange events began happening. It was claimed that when Ursula was 2 years old, she was left alone at home while a foster mother left her on errands. Her mother returned to find the front door wide open, and afraid of what might still be in the house, she called on her neighbours for assistance. And so as the group entered, they heard a loud wailing, like 1,000 cats in concert, throughout the house. Ursula's cradle was found empty. And after a frantic search throughout the house, her mother looked up to see Ursula sat perched on the top of an iron bar where the pans were hung above the fire. Ursula was naked and said to be cackling. Now it's said that Ursula was facially disfigured, and we know she was cruelly abused because of this. But according to local legend, she could fight back. Boy, could she fight back, even as a child. And the source written after her death tells of an event where the chief members of the parish were gathered together at a meeting. Ursula walked past the group, running an errand for her mother, and the men stopped to mock her, calling her hagface and the devil's bastard. Ursula kept walking to continue her errands. But as the men sat back down, the ruff on the neck of one of the principal yeomen transformed into a toilet seat and clapped down around his neck. A ruff, of course, is like a decorative sort of linen collar, which is it with kind of Elizabethan times. The man next to him began to laugh at this, and so as he did so, the hat he was wearing was suddenly replaced by a chamber pot. Bit of a theme going here. The gathered members of the parish began to laugh loudly, enough that the master of the house came running through to see what it was that was happening. And when he tried to run through the door, he found himself blocked by a large pair of horns that had grown suddenly from the sides of his head. And the source reports that the strange occurrences reverted back to normal shortly afterwards. The townspeople took them as a sign, basically, don't mock Ursula, leave her alone. Don't mess. It's not going to end well. So Ursula kind of grew up with this kind of aura about her. But as she grew, so her knowledge grew too. A knowledge of plants and herbs, and she became an invaluable resource for the townspeople as a herbalist. So that area, of course, where the line between socially useful and dangerous witch is blurred, isn't it, around medicine, around healing. So that earned her respect for her work, and she was then able to expand somewhat her social signal. I don't know how much we can see now. I'll try and have a look by the river, get enough light. So she then falls in with kind of a local carpenter whose name is Toby Shipton. And she's 24 when they marry. And he's said to be quite a catch, Toby. In fact, many people suggest and believe that Ursula must have enchanted him in order to kind of fall for her disfigurement. Just going to see beyond the disfigurement. But we don't know that to be the case, but it was certainly seemed to be the kind of rumour at the time. And from this point onwards, Ursula becomes Mother Shipton. She adopts her husband's name. And about a month, apparently, into the marriage, again, I don't know if you can hear the water, but we are down near the water, but I just think it's too dark, unfortunately, for you to pick that up on. But you're looking at water at the water's edge right now. So after being married for about a month, a neighbour came to the door and asked for help, saying that she'd left her door open and a thief had come in and stole a smock and a new petticoat. So Ursula's cave, by the way, is just over here. That's why I was bringing you down here to see if we could see anything, but the cave is on the other side. So without hesitation, Mother Shipton calmed her neighbour and said she knew exactly who'd stolen the clothing and would retrieve it the very next day. So the next day, Mother Shipton and a neighbour went to the market cross, where we started our tour. And the woman who'd stolen the clothing, couldn't kind of stop herself from putting on the smock over her clothes, the petticoat in her hand, and marching through the town. And when she arrived at the market cross, she began dancing, and danced straight for Mother Shipton and her neighbour, all the while singing, "I stole my neighbour's smock and cloak. I am a thief, and here to show it." When she reached Mother Shipton, she took off the smock, handed it over, curtsied, and left. 2 years later, in 1514, Toby Shipton died, and the town believed that Ursula was responsible for his death. The grief of losing her husband and the harsh words of the townspeople prompted Ursula Shipton to move into the woods, and she returned, crossing the river here, to the very same cave in which she'd been born. She sought peace in the cave by the river. And here she continued to kind of create potions and herbal remedies for people. And Mother Shipton's name slowly became more and more well known. And people would travel further and further distances to see her and to receive potions and spells. And as her popularity grew, she grew bolder and revealed she could see the future. She started making small prophecies involving her town and the people within. And as her prophecies came true, she began telling prophecies about the monarchy, about the future of the world. And in 1537, King Henry VIII wrote letters to the Duke of Norfolk where he mentions the Witch of York, believed to be a reference to Shipton. She clashed with his chief advisor, Cardinal Wolsey, who threatened to have her burnt at the stake. And many believed her to be a witch, but were terrified of her powers. She was known to have the power to turn people and objects to stone. And this has been witnessed by enough people to be believed by everyone in the town. So Mother Shipton's prophecies are pretty cryptic. But she's believed to have predicted the separation of the Catholic Church under Henry VIII, the fall of Cardinal Wolsey, the premature death of Edward VI, and the violent reign of Bloody Mary, and the long reign of a half-sister Elizabeth. She's said to have predicted the Great Plague of 1665 and the Great Fire of London the following year. Similarities between Mother Shipton and Nostradamus are many. But just as the great Nostradamus had done, in order to avoid persecution for the crime of witchcraft, Mother Shipton published her prophecies in rhyme and in verse. And they're pretty cryptic too. In 1559, she wrote an epic poem which contained her most famous prophecies. The British prophetess died in November 1561 in Clifton in Yorkshire, shortly before Nostradamus. And after the death, authorities were able to investigate her life and the cave and the powers where Mother Shipton was able to turn people and objects to stone. And of course, it was discovered the cave contained a petrifying well that had such a high mineral content that if objects are continually exposed to the water over weeks and months, a mineral crust will form, clinging to the exterior, giving the impression the original object had been turned to stone. So this is the attraction where you can pay to come in, to visit Mother Shipton's cave, to see the very same petrifying well. Well worth coming along to if you're here in this part of the world. John Wayne's hat is amongst the Stetson, is amongst the collection of items, lots of teddy bears and toys. It is quite remarkable. The mineral crust that forms, that appears to turn things to stone. So whether that's enough to explain everything that went on, or maybe the constant drinking in the infant period and later life of this mineral-rich water maybe an impact on her behaviour, on her psychology, who knows? But either way, Mother Shipton has not been forgotten. 600 years later, 500 years later, we're still kind of talking about it. So there we go. It's a survival of sorts, right? So it's getting rather cold. What time are we? 10 to 6. So let's have a walk up now back up towards the top of the town, because I want to tell you a story about a murder. We'll get up there in a minute. Let's have another sip. It is getting really rather cold out here now, as the hour together that we're spending draws towards its own little winter, as you might say. It's certainly feeling it now on my extremities. The bits that are stuck out. So I think it's a wonderful name for a pub is the World's End. Knowing, of course, that these names are often historic. That's how people felt. Their worlds were so small that the edge of Knaresborough could at one time been thought of, not unreasonably, as the World's End. So you can see Mother Shipton's cave, the boating, the Town Centre Castle Museum, arts and crafts. But we're going to head up down towards the station, up to the top of the slope, and another satisfied customer of the World's End there is writing his review for Amazon. So hopefully we'll get another glimpse of the bridge. I'll try and have a look from the top as well when we go past the station. And we're going to walk past the Manor House now. The Manor House is, you might notice and reference it when we walk past, but the old Manor House is like a checkerboard. It's like a chess table, because a 17th century, 18th century, I think, landowner here, was such a fan of chess, he decorated his house inside of a chessboard, and it took off. So it's one of the delightful quirks of Knaresborough is many places you'll go and see will be decorated like chessboards. So in case you wondered what's that about, it's not a Formula One or motor racing thing. It's to do with his love of chess. But what's kind of interesting about the manor house is at the heart of it is the remains of a tree, because it was built on a site identified by King John. King John treated the forest of Knaresborough, this area where we are now, was once kind of covered in trees all the way across, right? And he reckoned it to be the best hunting in the kingdom. Was he King John? My namesake, only one King John in history. Large Union's a kind of rather poor king, but nonetheless, great fan of hunting. And so Knaresborough was his spot. He loved to come here to hunt. Stayed at the castle, Knaresborough Castle, so he spent lots of money here as well, making it comfortable. And there would be a particular tree where after they'd done the hunting, and they'd had a thoroughly good time, they'd sit down, have a picnic, and kind of chill out and relax. And King John liked this spot so much. It's the crags we were talking about earlier. Quite literally, Knaresborough cut from the hillside. So I'll just kind of come over here and show you up the... You can see the exposed rock is very gnarly indeed, the kind of carboniferous rock. And I say this is the really hard rock, that the soft stuff has been kind of cut away. So King John liked it so much that he had basically a hunting lodge created where this tree was. But rather than cut the tree down, where they'd sit and kind of have their kind of post-hunt little picnic banquet, or what do you call it, al fresco dining, they built a house around it. And so at the centre of the house was a tree. And that tree, the remains of it are kind of still there. And so the centre of this house dates from the 12th century, believe it or not. And it's another one that has actually got a ghost story. There's quite a lot, actually, of houses. I must do some research to try and pick up some more ghost stories, because there's quite a few in this town. But obviously, people don't share them. They're not written down necessarily, because obviously people make money out telling ghost stories, so they're kind of quite close to their chest the way they do them. So I need to do some research, but there are definitely some stories. But I know that one of them, so this cottage, so the manor house is here, and then we've got the tenant cottage, we'll look at that in a second, there is a ghost story related to this building here with the checker, about a ghostly kind of apparition of a woman who's said to haunt the old manor house. So to say, this was the house, obviously renovated and updated since, but built for King John and his hunting party at the end of their kind of hunts. And it's believed to be the ghost of a former resident who died under mysterious circumstances. But I've got an idea about this. Her apparition has been seen wandering around the house, and her presence is often accompanied by a strong smell of lavender. Now, lavender has been used for centuries as a herbal remedy for a variety of ailments. And during the 14th century, the bubonic plague, otherwise known as the Black Death, and this kind of devastating pandemic that swept through Europe, lavender was used to treat the symptoms of the plague as well as to ward off the disease. Because lavender has an antiseptic and antibacterial properties, making it an effective treatment for the bubonic plague. So the herb was used to treat the swollen lymph nodes, fever, and pain associated with the disease. And lavender oil was also used to disinfect homes and hospitals to ward off the disease. So could this be the story of a lady who was nursing a victim of the plague, trying to purge it from the household before she too fell to its deadly ravages? I don't know, that's my kind of supposition, but I'm sticking to it. So, tree in the middle of the house. Right, fantastic. So I'm just going to take a sip, and then we're going to do the frankly punishing water bags bank, which is uphill all the way. So I'm going to puff and pant and wheeze and cough, no doubt, and you'll get to enjoy. Here, first up, beautiful 17th century tenant's cottage. Probably somebody who sort of had a fairly high-ranking job. The manor cottage, quite possibly the kind of the retainer, the steward, the guy that ran the accounts and hired and fired, because he's one of, but it's a sloped thatched cottage. So if that doesn't do it for you, I'm afraid I can't help you. Very, very cute. So we're going to cross the railway line to kind of go through the last story of the evening, a story for murder. This line, railway line just in front of us, takes travellers from Knaresborough to York. So it's a very short train journey, about half an hour, if that, somewhere in that region. So it's getting right steep, right towards the top. I should have limbered up before I start this. I wanted to do a different version of this tour, so I don't end up going uphill at the end. That's just very, very bad planning on the part of the guide. So I entirely blame the guide for this, and that's me. So the railways made it dead easy to visit York, Knaresborough. But actually, the story I'm going to tell you is from a good 100 years before. Let's have a quick look at the church while here. And it shows that people travelling to York was nothing new 100 years before the railways, but it might not always be their choice. So I'm going to tell you the story of the murder of a guy called Daniel Clark and a man called Eugene Aram, who's found guilty of that murder. So Eugene Aram was a school teacher. He kind of grew up as a kind of precocious youth of intelligence, but not from a family of means. So he was clever, but he was poor. His parents weren't really in a position to give him the sort of boost in society that perhaps his talents might otherwise have warranted. The social kind of opportunities for him were highly limited, to say the least. So he ends up as a school teacher, probably about the best outcome one could hope for, under those kind of rather reduced sort of circumstances, with no money to buy his way into the professions. It's perhaps no surprise that a schoolmaster was the obvious place. So when we think about Eugene Aram committing murder, it's not the sort of crime we expect to kind of link to a sort of man, sort of studious, intellectual. And particularly if we did, we would imagine that the motive would be somewhat better than plain, good old-fashioned greed. But it seems, in the case of Eugene Aram, that it was in fact greed that led him to his grisly end. So on the 8th of February in 1745, Aram, in conjunction with a man named Richard Houseman, murdered one Daniel Clark, a shoemaker here at Knaresborough. And this unfortunate man who was murdered had previously married a woman of good family. So something actually that Aram had failed to do. He also wasn't able to kind of marry money. Clark had done so. And the murdered man Daniel Clark had gone around telling people and circulated reports saying that his wife was entitled to a considerable fortune, which he himself would soon receive. So in other words, he was due to come into a lot of cash. Thereupon Aram and Richard Houseman, conceiving hopes of kind of making advantage of the circumstance, persuade Clark to make an ostentatious show of his own riches to induce his wife's relations to give him that fortune of which he boasted. In other words, for them to hand it over prematurely. So there's kind of sagacity, if not honesty, in this advice. And so Clark was kind of induced easily to comply with this because obviously he complied with his own desires. He wanted the money because he'd borrowed. He was in debt, he had lines of credit, a large quantity of silver plate, jewels, watches, rings, etc. So he needed this money to clear his debts. And he told the people he purchased these from that a merchant in London had sent him an order and no doubt entertained his credit until he sudden disappearance in February of 1745. So basically he's spending money all around town, money he hasn't got. And people thought that he'd probably gone abroad, or at least to London, to dispose of everything he bought on credit. But when Clark got possession of these goods, Aram and Houseman determined to murder him, and in order to share the booty between them. And so on the night of the 8th of February 1745, they persuaded Clark to walk with them in the fields in order to consult with them on the proper method to dispose of these effects. And on this plan, they walked into a field, a small distance from the town, well known by the name of St. Robert's Cave. And when they came into this field, Aram and Clark went over a hedge towards the cave, and when they got within 6 or 7 yards of it, Houseman, by the light of the moon, saw Aram strike Clark several times, and at length beheld him fall, but never saw him afterwards. And so this was the testimony, the evidence of Houseman that came forward at the trial. So the murderers going home shared Clark's ill-gotten treasure, the half which Houseman concealed in his garden for a 12-month, and then took it to Scotland, where he sold it. In the meantime, Aram carried his share to London, where he sold it to a Jewish dealer, and then engaged himself as an usher at an academy in Piccadilly, where in the intervals of his duty, he attended on scholars. He made himself a master of the French language and acquired some knowledge of Arabic and other Eastern European languages. After this, he worked in different schools in different parts of the kingdom, but he did not correspond with his friends in Yorkshire, and it was presumed, in fact, that he was dead. Thus, nearly 14 years had passed without the smallest clue being found to account for the sudden exit of Clark. So 14 years, in effect, he got away with murder. Down in Norfolk, most recently. But of course, they'd hidden the body in St. Robert's Cave. And this is where it was found 14 years later, in 1758, by a labourer working in the local quarry. And this sparked renewed kind of inquiry into Clark's disappearance. An interview with Aram's wife left the finger pointing towards Houseman, who under police interrogation made comments that actually left Aram in the frame for it. Just crossing over the station right now. The body of Daniel Clark was unearthed in St. Robert's Cave, and the police travelled all the way to Norfolk to arrest Aram on suspicion of murder. He was taken to York Castle, where he was tried and found guilty on the evidence, primarily, of course, from Houseman. And despite his attempts to convince the jury of his innocence, he was convicted. He wrote his own defence, which it was said was so admirable for his ingenuity that the whole court were astonished. It didn't work though, and he was finally executed, Eugene Aram, on August the 16th, 1759. He was almost in a state of insensibility, it said, after a failed suicide attempt. He did, however, eventually confess to murder just before his execution in York. And it seems that Aram was involved in the death of Clark, but that he was alone. It seems unlikely he was done it alone. When Houseman died, he was found to have a secret stash of Daniel Clark's possessions. It was probably unfair, therefore, that only one man to be executed for the murder. But that is the story of the local celebrity murderer of these parts, Eugene Aram, a man blessed with everything except the fortune to recognise the value of what he already had. So greed was his kind of downfall. So I'm walking up a steep incline again. So we're going to have one more go. I'm going to go around, because we're back at the top, to see if the lights have come on. If not, we'll call it a day and accept my apologies that the illumination wasn't all I'd hoped and assumed it would be. But as we've now reached 6 o'clock, we started an hour ago, it may well be the illumination has changed, as we are very, very close. Let us go along and have a look. Oh. Got my breath back now from my exertions. Waterbags Bank is he's not for the faint-hearted. And of course, while you're doing this, you've got to talk. The easy bit is kind of puffing and panting. It's commentating while you're doing it. So apologies if that sounded a little bit breathy at times. I can only offer up my advanced years as an excuse, but hopefully it didn't detract too much from the overall impact. So let's go and have a look and see if we can't find the castle. Let's now see if that's illuminated. Likewise, the viaduct, which was rather duller than perhaps we'd anticipated and hoped the first time round. The lighting fits the story. Oh, thank you, Rosie. That's kind of good to know, because obviously all we're trying to do really is just create a bit of a vibe, really. But I suppose you get used to everything at Christmas being so lit up that suddenly when those lights go down, that it always sort of seems a little bit denuded. There's a word. But I don't think it's taken away too much. But let's go and have a look one last time to see if we got any more illumination available to us. If so, it's well worth just taking a moment to check that out, because it is one of the great dramatic sights of this fair county of Yorkshire. Just coming by the police station, just there, so to behave myself as we walk by. And everywhere around are beautiful buildings, but sadly the illumination isn't such that I can share those with you. But let's just see if there's any more light to gladden our hearts and souls. Let's see what we get. No, it doesn't appear so. It doesn't appear so. We'll just have a little look and just see if maybe the viaduct lighting has come up, but the castle is still in its ghostly ethereal gloom. So there's literally nobody here. It's just me and you lot. So if something happens, we're on our own, it would appear. But that's so funky, that door. I love that. Let's see if we've got any more illumination to be had. No, unfortunately, they've definitely neglected to put the money in the meter tonight. So I'm not going to be able to share any more of what I'd anticipated. But hey ho, such is the travails of working live, is you can never quite know exactly what it is you're going to get. So at least you know you're going to get me. So hopefully that was a chunk of me, if nothing else. I do appreciate you joining me on this cold, wintry evening in North Yorkshire. I've enjoyed your company, wittering on, as I do, with my particular brand of rubbish, whilst you've sat and politely listened and nodded and not minded too much, hopefully, that it wasn't half as illuminated as we may have previously thought. But nonetheless, what a pleasure. And I promise you I'm going to do more tours. I've not been very active. I've allowed the kind of the work of the collective to sort of push my sort of needs second as a guide, and I'm annoyed at allowing that to happen. So I'm simply going to carve out more time for doing touring. So look out for a few more tours coming up in the next week or two, and we will come together once again. So thank you, everybody. Give us a wave, and give your fellow travellers a thumbs up, a wave, a goodbye. I'm sure you'll meet again pretty very soon somewhere else in the virtual world. But for now, from me in Knaresborough, in North Yorkshire, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for supporting me. This tour will be up for a bit on YouTube. So if you came in late, do jump in and watch the beginning. But thank you so much. And thank you, Linda. That's most kind. Liz in total darkness. That's how I often feel about my life, that I'm approaching it in total darkness. But nonetheless, we strive we strive, we continue to strive. So thank you, everybody, and absolutely delightful to have you with me. I'm going to say bye-bye. Thank you.